Leader.
Mr. Speaker, as there are still quite a number of speakers who have not yet spoken, I shall need to move an exempted business motion.
Please do.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that the proceedings on the business set down on the order paper for today be exempted at this day's sitting from the provisions of Standing Order Number 2.
Question is a motion moved by the leader. As many as are of the opinion say aye. Aye. To the contrary say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Leader.
Mr. Speaker, may I seek your consent and the general assent of members present to move that the proceedings on the item under discussion be exempted from the provisions of Standing Order Number 48 to remove the time limit in respect of Minister Tan See Leng's speech.
I give my consent. Does the Leader of the House have the general assent of honourable members present to so move? Aye. Leader, please proceed.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that the proceedings on the item under discussion be exempted from the provisions of Standing Order Number 48 in respect of Minister Tan See Leng's speech.
The question is as moved by the Leader of the House. As many as are of that opinion say aye. To the contrary say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Minister Tan See Leng.
Mr. Speaker, sir, a debate on jobs should be taken seriously. It is more than a hashtag. The success, the livelihoods, and the well-being of millions of our fellow Singaporeans are at stake. I had hoped that the PSP would share this understanding. Instead, the PSP's approach has disappointed me. First, the PSP continues to equivocate about FTAs, claiming it does not have enough information. What further information does the PSP need? We have explained that all foreigners have to meet the same work pass criteria. The PSP has asked for data on ICTs over the years because the data cited was for 2020, a crisis year. We didn't go into these details further because the trends were similar. But since the PSP persists in this line of inquiry, here are the numbers over the last 5 years. The total number of ICTs in 2020 was 4,200. This is overall. In addition, in 2019, it was 4,400. In 2018, 3,200. In 2017, 2,600. And in 2016, 2,100. Now, the total number of Indian ICTs in 2020 was 500. In 2019, 600. In 2018, 400. In 2017, 400. And in 2016, 300. These numbers have been consistently low. So I would ask the PSP again, what further information does it need? Given the racial undertones on this issue, and this is acknowledged by all members of the House, the PSP's equivocation is not only misleading, but it's also dangerous. Second, the PSP has fielded a slew of data requests via parliamentary questions, and it has made a sweeping statement that there is no credibility in any of our statements because we have not released all of the data it has asked for. It has equivocated that it cannot provide answers because it has no information. Let me be very clear. When it comes to data on our local workforce, we publish it regularly at a high level of granularity, and this is in line with international standards. But it seems the PSP is not aware of this. In the 26th July parliamentary sitting, the PSP filed a PQ asking for the annual breakdown numbers of local PMEs from 2005 to 2020. Parliamentary rules made it clear that a PQ should not ask for information that is already publicly available. Nevertheless, in my reply to Ms. Phua, I told her where to look for such data. I've also told her that the data stretches back to 1991 on the Ministry of Manpower's website, if she was interested. Notably, I have not heard the PSP use any of the data we have provided in its arguments. We have responded, and instead of being bogged down by these unhelpful distractions, I want to speak about the anxieties of Singaporeans, workers and business owners alike. Now, I acknowledge these anxieties, they are present, but they're not just present in Singapore alone, but they are present all around the world. I oppose the PSP's motion because it does not provide the solutions that Singaporeans anxious about jobs and competition seek. The way to address Singaporeans' anxieties about jobs and competition in a fast-changing economy is to invest and continue to invest heavily in developing our local workforce and ensure that foreigners complement rather than displace our locals. Minister Wong has already shared some important perspectives on our strategy. I will share some of the facts and data that are relevant. Turning first to the jobs landscape. Now, the PSP fixates on the increase in the number of foreign PMATs to argue that locals have been displaced and have lost out. It has painted a picture of widespread displacement based on the anecdotes it has heard. But how have local PMETs actually fared? MOM publishes this data regularly at fine granularity, but the PSP has not made any mention of this. So let me walk you through the numbers. With your permission, Mr. Speaker, sir, may I display some slides on the LED screens?
Yes, please.
First, look at the local PMAT employment. The PSP harps on the number of foreign PMETs. This is depicted by the orange bars. But the number of local PMAT jobs, which is depicted by the blue bars, is significantly higher. Over the past decade, there was an increase of 110,000 EP and S pass holders, but local PMATs increased by 300,000. This is the case even if you look at some of the subsectors that hire more EPs: finance, Infocom, and professional services. Over the past decade, EP and S pass holders in these subsectors increased by 40,000, but local PMATs increased by almost 155,000, almost 4 times. This goes to show that competition between locals and foreigners is not a zero-sum game. Now, the PSP has asked whether most of the local job creation went to PRs rather than Singaporeans. During the 6th July ministerial statement, I have already shared that the majority of local PME growth over the last decade went to Singaporeans born in Singapore. This is the same for PMATs. Some other data points we publish should make it clear that Singaporeans have benefited. First, MUM regularly publishes unemployment rates for PRs and citizens. The unemployment rate of citizens has remained stable and low. Secondly, the PR population has also remained stable over the past decade at around 500,000. So it cannot be the case that most of the employment growth went to PRs. But more fundamentally, as a society, I don't think we should be drawing lines between Singapore citizens and permanent residents. Many of our PRs either share family ties with Singaporeans or have studied, worked, or lived here for some time. They contribute to our strengths as a society and our economy. Singapore is an immigrant nation, and openness is one of our society's core strengths that has defined who we are. Now, the second point on local PMAT unemployment. Looking at the chart I think that was shown earlier on. Outside of crisis, if you look at the chart up there, okay, outside of crisis, it has generally remained at 3% or lower. Few countries have achieved unemployment rates as low as this. I think we're one of the lowest in the world, one of the top three, or the bottom three lowest in terms of these statistics in the world. Long-term unemployment rate, referring to those who were looking for a job for at least 25 weeks or about 6 months, is even lower, at below 1%. The increase in foreign PMAT has not caused our unemployment rate to rise. Third, the number of PMAT job vacancies. It has been on an upward trend since 2010 and has been hovering around 30,000 over the past 5 years. These vacancies are spread across various sectors. There are 4,300 unfilled PMAT jobs in Infocom, 4,100 jobs unfilled PMAT jobs in finance, 2,700 unfilled PMAT jobs in professional services. This is just to name a few. Now, if every additional foreigner results in one less opportunity for a local, why are there still so many unfilled vacancies? Surely, these vacancies should have long been filled. Finally, members of the House, median local PMAT wages. It has risen from $4,600 in 2010 to $6,300 in 2020. This represents a total increase of 38%. In real terms, it translates to a 21% increase. So, to sum up, looking at the data, and I put it in a table for everyone to see, the data shows us that while the number of foreign PMATs has increased, we saw one, even larger increase in local PMAT employment, two, low local PMAT unemployment, three, growing number of PMAT job vacancies, and four, growing local PMAT wages. In fact, the proportion of our workforce in PMAT jobs is amongst the highest in the world, at almost 60%, doubling up from 30% in the early 1990s. This is a very different picture from the dire situation that the PSP has portrayed. If you hear Mr. Leong, you would have thought that it has been midnight in Singapore for the past 30 years. Nevertheless, while the vast majority of local PMATs have experienced positive outcomes, we must not neglect the lived experiences of the minority who have not. Their experiences are equally valid too. It is not just the PSP who talks to Singaporeans. I meet them too, and I hear their concerns. And I feel their angst. One group in particular concerns me, our older local PMATs. They have contributed to society, and they are still able and willing to work. Yet, some amongst them have lost their jobs. When this happens, it can be devastating. It feels like a part of their identity is lost. And even for those who are still employed, seeing others around their age lose their jobs may cause them to be demoralized and causes them also to feel anxious. I understand the pain, but I must point out that this is happening not because of increased competition from foreigners, but also from deeper structural trends. If you look at this chart, the unemployment rate amongst older local PMATs started diverging from the overall rate from about 2015 onwards. I remember this year particularly well because it was the year I attended the World Economic Forum, and at that time, big data was top of the agenda. That was the year that big data and machine learning hit the mass market very rapidly. Companies were racing to build up digital teams. It created new roles which required new skill sets while disrupting some existing roles and skills. Against this backdrop, our older PMATs faced competition. not so much from foreigners, but from technology, and possibly also from younger Singaporeans who had the necessary skills. We saw these trends happening, and we rolled out Skills Future in January of 2016. We knew that lifelong learning had to become the norm so that Singaporeans could pivot to new opportunities. And we built on this foundation year after year. But the government's efforts is only half the story. What really makes the difference is the spirit of older Singaporeans, their willingness to remain open to new possibilities. Take Mr. Arnold Lim, who spent 25 years in the banking industry and was retrenched at the age of 50. After a year of efforts to return to the banking industry, he decided to join PalSecure, an IT firm. The learning curve was steep for him initially, given his lack of IT experience. PalSecure hired him through the Web Developer Career Conversion Program, which allowed him to pick up new technical skills and gain relevant on-the-job experience. Mr. Lim subsequently took on additional IT certifications on his own accord. And in his own words, after 50 is a new start for me. Now, I've spoken at length about unemployment, but various members of the House have pointed out that this may not reveal the full picture of underemployment and asked if the government is monitoring this. Now, there are two different concepts of underemployment. One is time-related, when a worker would like to work for longer hours, but is unable to find a job that allows him to do so. This is well defined, and internationally there are ways to measure this. The Manpower Ministry regularly tracks and publishes resident time-related underemployment, and this can be found in MUM's Labour Force Survey. The time-related underemployment rate has averaged 3.6% over in the past 10 years. Although the resident time-related underemployment rate rose to 4.1% in 2020 due to COVID-19, it still remains relatively low. The other type of underemployment is skills-related, when a worker believes that his current job does not fully utilize his skills. Now, this is more subjective, and this is what I think a few members have alluded to earlier on. But this is more subjective as there is as yet no internationally accepted standard for measuring this. MOM is part of a working group led by the International Labour Organization, or ILO, to develop suitable methodologies to relate an individual's occupation to their skill and education level. These are discussions involving professional labour market statisticians. So while I appreciate the interest of members for MOM to magically provide a KPI for skills underemployment, the fact that there is at the ILO a working group of statisticians studying how this should be measured should highlight that this is not a simple matter. In the meantime, we regularly track and publish the number of self-employed persons, or SEPs. Now, another chart here, the graph shows the share of our local workforce who are self-employed persons since 2010. They include private hire car drivers, taxi drivers, real estate agents, and hawkers. And these are not employed by a company. The proportion of SEPs has remained stable at between 8 to 10% over the past 2 decades, although we did see an uptick during COVID. Now, gig workers are defined as self-employed persons who use online matching platforms. The top occupation of gig workers is private hire car drivers on online matching platforms like Grab or Gojek. Around 1.5% of our local workforce are working in this particular occupation. However, in response to a survey by MUM, 70% of them said they do this on a preferred basis because they would like the flexibility and also the freedom of time. Grab's own survey echoed this. More than 70% of their private hire car drivers have chosen to take up work via Grab because of the flexibility of time. Now, for the 30% who wish to transit to regular employment, they can tap on our skills training and employment facilitation services, including career advisory counseling offered by the WSG and E2I. And as mentioned by PM Lee during the 2021 NDR, MARM will form an advisory committee to propose recommendations to improve protection for this group. Now, ultimately, the best thing we can do for our locals is to continually invest in them, to help them adapt and compete. But it seems that the PSP would want us to take a more effortless route and simply target the 400,000 foreign PMATs they say are here. In fact, as Mr. Leong noted, the number of EP and S-Pass holders has fallen to 350,000. How much lower does he want it to go? 300,000? 200,000? Or maybe zero? Ms. Hazel Phua has painted a simple narrative that if we keep labour supply tight, it will contribute to productivity improvements and a higher wage growth for Singaporeans. But at a certain point, a tight labour market can also lose us opportunities and the ability to internationalise. This can cost us jobs and wage growth in the long run. It is not such a simple linear relationship. Let us not talk about rebalancing abstractly. Let's focus instead on the PSP's policy suggestions. Can the PSP explain how all of its suggestions will not dampen Singapore's attractiveness to foreign investors and cause poorer outcomes for the vast majority? As a small country that is devoid of any natural resources, there are severe consequences if we turn inwards, lose our luster as a regional hub, and cause companies to leave our shores and take the jobs with them. I speak to many businesses, trade associations, and chambers. A common thread in their feedback is the difficulty of finding enough locals with the right skills, and this has hampered their expansion plans. Some of them are giving up and turning to hiring foreigners based in their home country. After all, people can now work from anywhere. The 10 biggest MNCs in Singapore alone create around 30,000 local PMAT jobs. If they decide to leave, we would not be talking about recouping tens of thousands of jobs, but about losing more of them instead. Members might also know that Singapore has already fallen from 1st to 5th in the Institute for Management Development's, or IMD's, 2021 World Competitiveness Ranking. Now, this was partly due to COVID, as our small economy was more affected by the global slowdown than larger ones. In particular, we have slid in our openness towards global trade and talent, in rankings regarding attitudes towards globalization, availability of skilled labor, and immigration laws preventing companies from hiring foreign labor. I will say this plainly to Mr. Leong. What he and his party spew, attacking seeker and FTAs and foreigners in general, has an effect on IMD's assessment and on business sentiments, both here and overseas. Investors watch and wonder how many other Singaporeans feel this way. Has Singapore become less welcoming of foreign investments, of global talent? Why do you think we are taking this issue so seriously? In July, Minister Ong and myself made ministerial statements. We decided to confront Mr. Leong openly. In August, the Prime Minister addressed the issue again in his National Day rally speech. And now in this debate, three ministers have spoken thus far, myself for the second time. Do Mr. Leong and his party think Singapore will forever be attractive to investors? Is there some magic water? Stupid. Is there some magic water that draws global multinationals here, and that all this happens spontaneously? Mr. Speaker, sir, we made this happen, and we will continue to make it happen. You've heard Mr. Wong recall how Mr. Lee Kuan Yew went so far as to pay special attention as to how the road leading from Changi Airport to the city looked. Day in, day out, many government agencies continue to work hard to make sure that we remain safe and attractive to investors, so that they come here, they sink billions here, erect plants, labs, studios, facilities here, create jobs and livelihoods for Singaporeans, including our children, so that they can do jobs of the future and not of the past. As a result of this unremitting work over the last 60 years, Singapore remains a competitive economy, as proven by our pipeline of investments, even during the pandemic. However, please note, other economies are also upping their ante. We cannot afford to take our economic competitiveness for granted. The attitudes that PSP is promoting are detrimental to how others perceive our openness. Mr. Leong, please have a care. I know that by and large, Singaporeans are pragmatic, and they understand that we need to remain open to global talents and stay connected. Some of them feel frustrated when they see a foreigner being hired, though he may not be able to do the job as well as a Singaporean, or simply because he has links with the hiring manager. We know these sorts of things happen, and that is why when it comes to our foreign workforce policies, we constantly adjust them to ensure that foreigners complement and not displace our locals. We strengthen our levers against discriminatory practices. Yet, in spite of our work, the PSP continues to criticize our foreign workforce policies as being too lax. And today, we hear some ideas from them. They characterized our foreign talent policy as a conduit for cheap immigration and a source of cheap labor, and claimed that the qualifying salary of S-passes and EPs are too low. They said that there's an unfair wage competition because employers do not have to pay the 17% CPF contribution for foreigners. They have asked us to raise the EP qualifying salary to $10,000 and the S-pass to $4,500. And they've asked us to impose a $1,200 levy, and to impose a 25 to 30% cap on work pass holders and PRs, to impose a hard nationality cap of 10% in each firm. Mr. Leong also laments that we do not have enough Singaporeans in leadership positions, and elsewhere he suggested greater protection for top leadership roles. Let me take each point in turn. First, on Mr. Leong's claim that our qualifying salaries are too low and that there is unfair wage competition. I wonder whether Mr. Leong is aware that the numbers he cited are the minimum qualifying salaries for EP and S-pass holders at the youngest ages. Does he know that our qualifying salaries rise with age to maintain a level playing field for our mature PMATs? For example, the EP qualifying salary for those in their 40s is around double of the minimum qualifying salary. I would like to ask, has the PSP actually consulted businesses on what they think of our current policy? Many businesses, including the SMEs, are already crying out that they are not able to access the foreign PMATs that they need. We listen to them, we engage them, we help them to transform, and we help them to find suitable Singaporeans. But ultimately, we explain to them why we have to hold the line. Mr. Leong has also repeated the point that foreign EPs are cheaper to hire than locals because their employers do not make CPF contributions. I have already clarified this point on the 6th of July, but let me do so again. The CPF is set aside for our retirement needs, and it can also be used for housing. Foreign PMATs are not working in Singapore on a permanent basis, and we are not responsible for their retirement adequacy or their home ownership needs. It does not make sense for us to extend the CPF coverage and benefits to them. I think everyone in this house knows the interest rate percent that we pay on our CPF contributions. I will not elaborate further. Fundamentally, our CPF system is designed to benefit our resident workers, not to help attract or deter foreigners. So how do we maintain a level playing field? When reviewing the qualifying salary to maintain a level playing field, we take into account the CPF contributions as part of the cost to employers. Ms. Hazel Phua also highlighted the issue of false salary declarations and kickbacks as ways for employers to get around our work pass framework. MARM takes firm measures to safeguard the integrity of the work pass framework. False declarations of any sorts are an offence under the EFMA. It carries a fine of up to $20,000, up to 2 years imprisonment, or both. The fact that Ms. Hazel Phua is aware of this means she's also aware that MOM has been enforcing this and publicizing our efforts to stamp out these illegal practices. At the same time, the PSP solution is to raise salary criteria for EP and S-Pass holders significantly. Does the PSP think that this underlying problem will get better with their suggestion? Second, imposing a levy of $1,200 on all EP holders. This is easy enough for the government to do. It also generates revenue. So why do we not go down this route? Because at the EP level, our primary focus is on regulating quality. A levy would have the opposite effect. Employers have finite budgets for manpower. Suppose an employer has set aside $10,000 a month for a new PME hire. A levy of $1,200 effectively reduces his budget to $8,800. This immediately narrows the pool of EP candidates from those willing to consider a salary of $10,000 and below to those willing to consider a salary of $8,800 and below. Now, how would this benefit the employer or his Singaporean employees if the intention is to seek the best talents available? We would also be sending contradictory signals if we say that we welcome high-caliber global professionals to Singapore on the one hand and impose a levy on them on the other. So instead of a levy, we focus on regulating quality through the EP salary criteria, and this sets a high bar so that EP holders must reach to work in Singapore, and it raises their quality over time. Third, imposing a 25 to 30% cap on work pass holders and PRs in the long run. First, I think PSP should know that we have quotas at the S-Pass level. We have already been reducing the S-Pass sub-DRC over the past decade for the services sector. For the services sector, it's currently at 10%, down from 25%. And there are ongoing cuts still taking place in all the other sectors. I've also explained why we do not set quotas at the EP level, because there is fierce competition for global talent and worldwide shortages in areas such as technology and digital skills. And doing so would send the wrong signal that we are not welcoming to such talent. Let me give a concrete example. Take, for example, infrastructure financing. Since the 2000s, MAS has been promoting this because there's a huge infrastructure opportunity in Asia and a yawning financing gap. However, working in this area requires significant expertise given the complex risk profile of infrastructure projects. In the early days, we did not have enough local talent to work in this area. Global banks, especially Japanese and European banks, were the most active players in the initial phase and had the talent and the expertise. Mizuho Bank was one such bank that chose to set up a project financing team in Singapore. In 2003, Singaporeans accounted for 40% of its project finance team. Now, Singaporeans is about 70%, occupy 70% of a much larger office. The proportion of Singaporeans is 70% of a much larger office. Now, if we had imposed the quotas up front, I doubt if this would have happened. If the PSP insists on a 30% quota, then I would like to ask, would you turn away a company that creates 69 high-end jobs for locals because it needs 31 foreigners from abroad? if PSP's prevailing assumption is that less foreigners means more jobs for locals, what would stop it from lowering this quota further to 20% or 10% or 0%? He had previously suggested that it is not good enough for Singaporeans to make up 70% of the workforce in the financial sector, but that it should be even higher at 80% or 90%. In which case, how do we remain and maintain our status as an international financial center? Fourth, imposing a hard nationality cap of 10% within each firm. Once you stack up a 30% cap on top of another 10% cap, it becomes clear that Mr. Leong's policy can only make the environment so hostile that very few foreign investors will consider Singapore to build any business. Maybe no foreign investor will consider. To use the example of Mizuho Bank, the effect of Mr. Leong's proposal is to tell a Japanese bank that only 10% of their workers can be Japanese nationals. Nevertheless, as I shared in my 6th July ministerial statement, we understand the tensions that can arise when a foreign nationality dominates. And we have levers today to address this. The FCF watch list, the Fair Consideration Framework watch list, identifies firms with high concentration of a single nationality. Their work pass applications are scrutinized for potential discriminatory hiring, and TAFEP, or the Tripartite Alliance for Fair Employment Practices, engages them. And as I had also shared, we are exploring further refinements to our EP framework to help us achieve our objectives of a strong Singaporean core, complemented by a diverse foreign workforce. And finally, on Mr. Leong's calls to ring-fence positions in top management for Singaporeans, let me state simply that we help Singaporeans rise to the top, not by protecting them, but by enabling them. Many companies have programs in place to groom talent for leadership positions. Take Asia Pacific Breweries, for example. Their staff can participate in their management team and beyond fast-track program, be rotated into positions globally, and expand their skill sets. When companies first set up here, it is understandable that they will need to bring in many of their senior management to oversee the business here. If we protect the top management jobs for Singaporeans alone, and companies decide not to invest here because of that, we would lose good jobs for our locals. And the opportunity to for them to take on the higher level positions in the future would also diminish. I worry that the PSP is calling for policies that are not only short-sighted, but protectionist, and this will do grave harm to Singaporeans. I would also like to address Mr. Pritam Singh's idea of a time-limited EP to facilitate skills transfer. Now, I should point out to Mr. Singh that our work pass, no work pass is issued indefinitely. At a point of renewal, employers must meet our prevailing criteria. Now, the idea of a skills transfer requirement sounds good in theory, but in practice, it is not as straightforward to implement. The process of skills transfer is rarely linear or one-to-one. So, I don't think it makes sense for the Ministry of Manpower to be the judge to set a fixed duration and force employers to let go of experienced work pass holders once their fixed term is up. So, I want to finally address our efforts to stamp out discrimination. Minister Wong touched on the anti-discrimination legislation earlier, but I would like to address the PSP's claim that because the FCF, or the Fair Consideration Framework, was introduced in 2014, fair consideration for our locals was not a priority before that. In fact, the tripartite partners have been issuing guidelines on fair employment practices over the past 2 decades, having introduced the tripartite guidelines on non-discriminatory job advertisements as early as 1999. In 2002, we added the Code of Responsible employment practices. In 2006, we set up the Tripartite Alliance for Fair and Progressive Employment Practices, TAFEP. In 2007, we issued the Tripartite Guidelines on Fair Employment Practices, or TGFEP. And in 2011, we enhanced the TGFEP to include guidelines on hiring and developing a Singaporean core. In 2014, the introduction of the FCF took these efforts one step further by introducing the job advertising requirement. And we have been progressively strengthening the FCF ever since. We introduced the FCF watch list in 2016 as a systematic framework for engaging firms with outlier workforce profiles and scrutinizing them for potential discrimination. In 2020, we strengthened the penalties against firms found to have discriminatory hiring practices. And in the same year, we extended the coverage of the FCF job advertising requirement to S-passes and doubled the minimum advertising period from 14 days to 28 days. Ensuring responsible and fair employment practices has always been our priority. At the National Day rally recently, PM Lee announced we are taking the next step of strengthening our enforcement against workplace discrimination through legislation. Members of the House, this is a very significant major step, both philosophically and legally. This will cover discrimination on the grounds of nationality, in addition to other kinds of discrimination covered by the TGFEP. And it sends a clear signal that discrimination of any kind is not tolerated. When you consider all of the policies that we have put in place, it is quite clear that we are providing strong support for the employment of local PMETs. Even Ms. He Ting-Ru has noticed and acknowledged our plans to legislate TAFEP guidelines. Indeed, many companies tell us that they prefer to hire locals over foreigners, so long as they can find the skill sets here. And even if there's initially a shortage of skills, many are willing to develop local talent to fill these roles. Take, for example, PayPal. When it first started, it had to rely more heavily on global talent for specialized technical skills and more senior roles that required managing regional teams. However, PayPal committed to hire and train 150 Singaporeans across tech and business roles over 3 years. I acknowledge there will always be more work to be done. And I've said before in my past statements that we are always a work in progress because we continue to refine and tweak and improve. We will always refine continuously our policies to secure the well-being, the livelihoods, and the livelihoods of Singaporeans in a post-pandemic world. But, members of the House, we must not discard the principles that have worked well for us. Mr. Speaker, sir, let me now say a few words in Mandarin, and I'll try and keep it short. 最近，新加坡中华总商会会长黄山中先生在《联合早报》专栏中提到，虽然商界认同政府必须优先保留就业机会给本地人，但我们也意识到，引进优质外来劳动力是推动本地经济发展不能缺乏的一股巨大动力。这起着与本地劳动力相辅相成的共赢关系。我非常同意黄先生的看法。新加坡经济政策的重心是为国人创造良好的就业机会，从而改善并提升大家的生活。政府的目标从未改变，帮助国人发挥潜能，把握新机遇，提高竞争力。随着经济的重塑和发展，许多企业引进了外籍专才来补充本地劳动的队伍，但这为本地员工带来了更激烈的竞争。有些员工难免倍感压力，尤其是年长专业人士 PMET。设身处地，我能了解他们的担忧。年长专业人士所面对的挑战来自多方面，比如数码科技的发展，促使全球经济结构性的转变，企业需要员工具备相关技能， 但这与年长专业人士之前所接受过的培训截然不同。此外，他们所面对的竞争对手不仅限于已在新加坡的外籍员工，还包括受过高等教育的年轻员工。在这个不断变迁和竞争激烈的世界里，我们应当如何面对？孔子曾说：“50知天命。”这让我有所领悟。人到中年，经历了人生的起起落落，具备了宝贵的经验，就更应该有能屈能伸的精神，不是墨守成规、固步自封，而是坦然地面对一切挑战。所以我要呼吁大家不断的自我提升，接受培训，掌握新技能，适应新的工作环境，共同为自己和家人打造一个更美好的未来。除了年长专业人士，自雇人士也面临了严峻的挑战。政府正关注为线上平台服务的自雇人士，因为他们与中介平台之间有着类似雇佣的关系，却不受雇佣法律的保护。所以我们已成立了咨询委员会，来探讨如何改善这群自雇人士的工作保障。至于其他想找到受薪工作的自雇人士，我们仍然会继续提供培训与职业配对的服务。香港乐坛知名歌手许冠杰有一曲金曲叫《世事如棋》，有一段歌词我一直难以忘怀：张眼远望，世事如棋，每局应观察入微，但求共你棋艺相比较，了解做人道理。的确，人生如棋，面对多变的棋局，一旦举棋不定，就会错失良机。针对经济与就业，政府也正积极推动企业创新转型，打造更多吸引国人的工作，确保国人能在与病毒共存的阶段里越战越勇，成为赢家。关键是在于大家齐心协力，奠定基础，把握时机，方能旗开得胜。谢谢。Let me conclude. The PSP has fielded a slew of data requests. We have responded to all of this. We've given you the number of foreign PMETs. We've given you the number of ICTs over the past few years. We've given you the number of local PMETs. Data is regularly published on unemployment and time-related underemployment. So the debate today is on whether SECA and other FTAs allow complete free flow. The answer is clear. It does not. And second, how do these impact on local employment? In July and now, we have shown you that local employment has increased as a result of FTAs. There's enough data for that. This suggestion that you are not being given data is really a red herring. Now, based on what we have shared today, I think reasonable members would agree that our strategies have worked for the vast majority of Singaporeans. I have not based this argument on anecdotes or perceptions alone, but on hard data and facts. Nevertheless, the concerns of the minority are just as important to all of us. Now, we cannot assure today that every Singaporean that their jobs will always be protected. But make no mistake, we will work very, very, very hard to protect every Singaporean and ensure your employability. Mr. Leong has presented us with one bleak and biased view, that of an anxious and fearful Singapore, whose instinctive reaction to challenges is to withdraw from the world. I reject this view of Singapore and Singaporeans. It doesn't define us, and it is not us. The motion put forward by Minister Lawrence Wong acknowledges our anxieties while affirming our achievements, preserves what has worked well, while pointing out the work to be done. And I repeat what Ministers Ong and Wong have said. We are prepared to fight the next general election on these principles. And we are determined to fight any party wedded to racism and xenophobia and a small-minded vision of Singapore. With that, I support Minister Wong's motion. Thank you very much.
Mr. Leong Ma Wai.
Thank you, Speaker, sir. Thank you, Minister, for your passionate, informative presentation. Okay, but I have a few clarifications. One is, PSP has never said we want a closed society or an economy. We have just suggested policies that you disagree. But today, we are happy that we are here, that all of us recognize that there's a problem. But of course, before I come to this debate, I know the problem is we cannot agree to the causes of the problem and the severity of the problem. As a result, our solutions will be very different. So what the Minister has said just now, I would like to, one, clarify that we have not said that we want a closed economy or society. We also want an open society. How we maintain the open society, how we send the message to foreigners, it depends on how we Singaporeans get united and speak with one force. Now we have two voices, one from the government, one from PSP, and maybe the other alternative parties as well, because we got the feedback from the ground. So what we want, whatever you say, today we come here to realize that there's a problem. And that means the past policies have some problems. You cannot just say that, oh, we just continue with those policies. So that's why we are asking for a rebalance. And I would want to explain to you a little bit more what rebalancing we are talking about.
Mr. Leong, are you seeking clarifications or making another speech?
Because
you will have a chance to round out later. If you have clarifications for the Minister, please raise them.
Okay. Okay, then I direct one question first. First of all, you mentioned about the number of PMEs that were, jobs that were increased from 2005 to 2020. On January the 6th, your number was 380,000 for locals and 112 for EPs. Today, you give us a figure of 300 and 100. What is the change? Why the change? First question. Minister, please.
Mr. Leong, Mr. Speaker, sir. Yeah. Well, I thank Mr. Leong for his agreement with many of our policies, even though he thinks that all he's asking for is a rebalancing. And I've said that we continually work to refine and tweak and improve our policies. So we thank you for at least...
Speaker, sorry, Speaker.
He doesn't agree.
Yes, Mr. Leong.
Thanks, Speaker. Minister, what I've said is that the policies have actually produced some problems. So we are here to discuss how to solve the problems. I didn't say I agree to your policies. In fact, one of the reason why we differ on our assessment of the situation is because I think some of the basic assumptions, there's a big difference. But we'll discuss again on that. So please continue, Minister.
Thank you. May I?
Thank
Mr.
you.
Speaker, sir? Yeah, thank you, Mr. Leong. Now, you've said that, you said that PSP has never said that it wants a closed economy. But, our point in all of our speeches, I don't think the PAP has ever suggested that we want an economy that's open to every and any foreigner. We have always maintained that we want to select the right talent to complement us. So I said, let us not talk in abstractions. Let us not hypothesize. What I had debated were your concrete suggestions and why it would not lead to the rebalancing that you asked for. Now, to your point on the differences in data cited, it's a matter of differences in time frame. Anyway, all of this data is published, Mr. Leong. You can look it up. And again, if you cannot find it, we're happy to point you, just as we have pointed Ms. Phua to where to look for that information.
Ms. Hazel Phua?
No, sorry, Speaker, sir, I still have one
Mr. Leong?
respond. Yeah. Minister, sorry. What is the difference in the time frame? Both are from 2005 to 2020, right?
On the 6th of July, Mr. Leong, Mr. Speaker, may I?
Please proceed.
Yeah. On the 6th of July, it's 15 years from 2005 to 2020. And at that time, we were talking about PME and EPs. If you notice that, I think perhaps, when we have time, I can actually segregate and explain to you the difference between PMETs, which include the EP and the S-Pass, and then PME, which is just the equivalent of the E-Pass. So today, the statistics quoted to you is 10 years, from 2010 to 2020, and it covers PMET and the EP and S-Passes. So I hope that clears so it's a different time horizon and also different categorization.
Ms. Hazel Phua?
Okay, thank you.
Firstly, the charts that have been displayed on the screen over at our location, we can't see any of it. So can I request for it to be made available to us in a different form?
I'm sure we can.
Okay. Now, the minister is still quoting 300,000 increase in local PME jobs, but you have not quite answered my question whether those figures, does it include changes resulting from reclassification, as I've mentioned in my speech earlier, and to clarify on the fact that about my PQs, asking for data that is already published. When I communicated with the parliamentary staff, I made it clear that I wanted to compare with some of the statistics that government has released, sometimes as PMETs, sometimes as PMEs. So I said that they could either tell me which are the final classifications that comes under PME or PMETs, or alternatively give me the total number for PMETs and PMEs, because what you have in what is published goes into final classifications.
Minister?
Thank you. Can I just have a minute? I think for your first point, in terms of the reclassification, I don't have all the statistics here with me now, but the majority I think I've shared that on the 6th of July in my ministerial statement. The majority of the local PME growth, over the last 10 years went to Singaporeans born in Singapore. The majority. Now, I would, that's more than 50%. So I would urge Ms. Phua not to drive this kind of separation and segregation, because I really don't think it's healthy for all of us, particularly when at some stage in our not too distant past, all of us, our parents, maybe our grandparents were immigrants.
Okay, I would like to clarify that my intention is not to separate between those who are born in Singapore and those who are naturalized, but merely to understand which are really jobs created and which are really just, due to technicalities, they result in an increase in job, but is not a real increase. It's just that the job holder's status is reclassified.
Minister, I'm not sure I fully understand that, but...
Should I explain further?
Yeah, so, okay, I mean, perhaps I wasn't clear. The majority of the jobs created went to Singaporeans who are born and bred here.
Not reclassified.
Not reclassified, yeah.
Cesar Phua, do you want to pursue that?
Okay, you are unable to give a number, just majority.
She wants a number. So just, is you pick a percentage?
No, Ms. Cesar Phua, are you asking about Singaporeans, naturalized, born here, or are you talking about reclassification
actually,
of jobs?
my intention is just to net off the effect of that job increase, which is due to reclassification.
What reclassification?
So that we get a better idea what really is the new jobs, number of new jobs created.
Would you like to elaborate what do you mean by reclassification of jobs?
Okay, I've mentioned this in my speech earlier. So let's say, for example, you have 1,000 jobs held by foreigners. Then when these 1,000 PME jobs held by foreigners, and when these foreigners becomes PRs, because of the change in status, this 1,000 jobs is now classified under local PMEs.
So it's still the issue about Singaporean-born, others, and so on. Okay. Minister?
Mr. Speaker, sir, earlier on I covered it. Perhaps maybe I was too long-winded. I'll just repeat it. During the 6th July ministerial statement, I've already shared that the majority of local PME growth over the last decade went to Singaporeans born in Singapore. I know you want a specific percentage. It's a majority, so it's more than 50%. And this is the same for PMATs. Now, some of the other data points we publish should make it clear that Singaporeans have benefited. So we publish regularly unemployment rates for PRs and citizens. Now, the unemployment rate of citizens has remained stable and low. Now, secondly, the PR population has also remained stable over the past decade at around 500,000 or 500,000. So it is not, and it cannot be the case that most of the employment growth went to PRs.
Yes, but the PRs become citizens, so there's a drop in the PR, and then the new foreigners go in to fill up that PR numbers. So as a whole, the number of citizens plus PRs actually increases. That base increases, and therefore leading to an increase in the number of local PME jobs purely due to reclassification, not job creation. That is my point. I'm not really even making a difference between citizens and PRs. I'm just talking about local, citizens plus PR.
Mr. Speaker, may I respond?
Yes, please.
Ms. Phua, I've said that the majority of the jobs went to local bred and born Singaporeans. Majority, that means more than 50%. So there's no reclassification. So it's not like as if these PRs became naturalized Singaporeans, right? That majority number are Singaporeans who are born and bred here. So the statistics do not include, for that majority, I mean under that category, do not include those who are not born here.
Okay, maybe let me just clarify. When the majority of the job increase or majority of the PME jobs are held by those born and bred in Singapore?
Majority of the job increase.
I guess the point is that I'm actually very mindful of, and I'm actually trying to also understand the members' question here, but the majority of the jobs created went to Singaporeans.